Welcome to Winning the Game of Life. Known as Jungleman at the poker table, Dan Cates has gone from being the bag boy at McDonald's with no friends and a dead-end future to winning over $11 million in online poker, over $7 million in live tournaments, and is a World Series of Poker champion. He has found fame, fortune, been to incredible places all over the globe, and connected with some amazing people. It looks like Dan has won the game of life, but that is not the way he sees it. Dan sees winning as doing his part to help everyone in the world win. He knows he can't do it alone, though. He knows it's going to take a collective effort with anyone that wants to see the same thing. Join us each week as Dan starts the conversation to do just that. On the show, Dan will interview incredible individuals that have made the impossible possible. Those that have won the game of life, and those that want to help others win as well. Hit subscribe and follow Dan's journey on Instagram at @TheDanCates. Let's explore anyone and anything that can help make this world a better place, increasing the odds of us all winning the game of life. And now, here's your host, Dan Cates.
Hello, everyone. Today, I've got one of my favorite recreational players, and he's quite the businessman, Fedor Holz. He's happens also to be the biggest tournament winner in 2015, 2016, the biggest winner on Hendon Mob, something like this. And part of the Forbes 30 under 30, of course, as the astonishing businessman that he is. I am actually curious how your business is doing. I have no idea, to be honest. But I presume it's doing well. That's my impression. I think I heard that somewhere. Fedor, great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Yeah, so how did it all get started, Fedor?
The poker or the business?
Let's start with the poker, because I am a poker player. We'll get to the business so we can warm up my brain, so I can warm up everyone's brain so you don't blow our minds with all this business stuff you've got going on these days. I know poker, you're only playing 5% of the time as a full pro. Yeah, just lead us into the recreational player life.
Yeah, so the really quick download is I started, playing 1 cent, 2 cents with friends when I was 16. Started really liking it. Started playing full time for years without much success. Then had my breakthrough year in the third year, made my first million. Moved to Vienna, and then played high stakes live and online MTTs for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Had a really, really good year in 2016, and then quit. So that's the fast zoom through poker career.
All right, so you conquered the poker world and you decided it was too easy. So it was time to start a business, or to go back into the business world, or where you really belonged, it sounds like.
Yeah, not really. I was pretty burned out from playing, actually, and just felt like taking a break. And then I guess I always liked learning new things. So it's not that I had this thought, oh, I need to build a business. It was more like I started getting curious about new things, and then some of them turned into businesses.
Okay, that's interesting. That's a much different route than how I entered business. What was I gonna say? Oh yeah, I was actually reading about you. You're a bit more similar to myself as I thought. It sounded like you were not successful in the beginning with poker, but you kind of grinded it out and worked your way up. And you also originally started with video games, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was. I would say I probably played a couple thousand games without much success. So less than 2K in profit or something, and mostly it was I was probably winning on up to $50 or $100 buy-ins, and then I just randomly played 2, 4, and 5, 10 heads up, or played the 200 Sonic, or a 1K or something. So it was it was not great bankroll management, and then I think I got it was really good for me, because the moment I was good enough to play basically everything, I couldn't donk it off anywhere anymore. So that's I think led to me building my bankroll.
All right. Well, sounds like you made wise decision. Unlike many tournament players who made all their money and decided to donk it off.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I think after we were successful, especially with my group of friends, it seemed really hard. Like there weren't really many spots where I felt like, oh, now this is a spot to lose it all back. Like never really felt close. Like obviously I had downswings and I lost money, but it never really felt like, okay, now I'm gonna lose it all.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, it sounds like you already had the right mentality. You have to learn the hard way. Some people, this bankroll management stuff comes in naturally. I think the German efficiency may have helped. Although, in my opinion, you've got a little bit of the flair compared to many of the Germans. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know. Your style of poker is a bit, how should I say, less German and a little bit more like intuitive businessman style. I mean, not that businessy style, but it's not like let's say it's not by The Sims, and it's more.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Maybe a little bit
what's the flair? What's the flair you described?
I don't know, the stare downs and the bluffs with zero equity, the live reads and the let's see. Dare I say ego? Would you say that? I'll let you decide if that's I don't really know, to be honest. I don't want to judge, but the pride or the belief in oneself.
Yeah,
the belief in oneself.
I would say definitely ego. I felt like, although it was interesting because I felt much more tension from my opponents than from myself. Like I was definitely tense, and I was I had this, feeling like, oh, I gotta prove people here. It's like always competitive and always about like going at it. But I feel there was something weird about it where other people had it much more with me. I think that was actually a big reason why I crushed so hard back then, because there was a certain point where I tamed my, in uncertainties a bit, but then everyone was still going nuts against me, and it's just like led to spots that you never like. They make crazy calls against me, and in the spot where I never bluff and or don't over bluff for sure, and they would never do that against any of the other guys, and it's just that was actually, I think, a pretty big reason for my success. I think that people started doing things against me that they wouldn't do against someone else, and I guess that must have some ego reasons as well.
It sounds like the metagame got involved a little bit, and well, I'm a little bit surprised you're admitting a little bit of your secrets here, because I wouldn't have known that you were like shivering in your boots a little bit, as it sounds. I don't think it matters anyway. And yeah, it sounds like there's some, like, this isn't really German style. Like German style is, I know, is like open, like exact precise range and 3-bet with the randomizer that's secretly used with the hands. This is how I envision German style. If you know about the shuffle chip randomizer method, I don't know, maybe you do that. I've also heard at the poker table you do the exact same thing every single hand, at least in the beginning. I didn't know that, by the way. Someone just randomly told me that they were like studying you and they're trying to figure out your secrets. Well,
it's true. I had a time where I did like basically just try to have a routine where I automatize everything I'm doing, like the speed of my bets, the way I grab the cards, just to like it's kind of the Steve Jobs thing around just putting the same pullover on, like this idea, just like do everything. Like he always wore the same black pullover to not think about what to wear.
Oh,
And
okay.
And that was the same idea, as like I just didn't want to think about it, I just wanted to do it always the same, so I didn't have to think about how do I grab my cards. Did you see, like, because I saw it with other players, is I could see in their face when they looked at their cards if they were excited or not. So like I was like, when I played a 1K turbo, I knew for a third of the players whether they have a good hand or not. Like there's a lot of information in like how you look at your cards, how you grab them. Like you see already that when a hand takes longer pre-flop, some people just have a folding position with their hand. And
sure, that's true. Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely guilty of that myself a little bit. That one, I don't know about the excitement, but that one I know that I do a little bit.
Yeah, not with stronger players, the excitement, but with everyone medium and weaker, like you will see if they, if they get like 10s plus ace king, you will just see that they become more interested in the action, where they're generally maybe less interested in what's going on. So that's certainly something that is easy to pick up when you know what to look for.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the weaker players tend to like be much worse at masking their true feelings and tendencies. I personally have the belief that people's characteristics tend to, I'm really curious about this, I've never tested it, but I personally have a belief that people's well, I want to ask your opinion on this, that people's psychological tendencies show a lot more if they're beginners or moderate players, because they're not as aware as what they're doing. Their characteristics in life, I'm not sure to what extent, but really curious to see if that's true. What do you think as a businessman?
I think it's 100% true. I think in everything, what makes you up, or what has had a big impact on you, will vibe through all the things you do, I think. And what I see, it's actually funny, because with the weaker players, you will see it in their superficial actions. With the stronger players, you see it in their less superficial actions. So even if you look at, let's say, the 50 best players in the world, you will still see their characteristics really strongly in the way they play. And just not so easy to decipher, right? It's not so easy to interpret it, but still you see the calm, very precise and professional characteristic, like very competitive characteristic of, for example, Stevie, right? Like in his very, very calm and like very composed behavior. And so it's not easy to interpret, but you can still see his character. It's just not easy to put a hand to it.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask, what do you mean like that? Do you have another example to give?
So for example, let's say on the very wide spectrum of a beginner is, I often make the Brazilian businessman example is, I had a hand that I played with someone, he's maybe in his mid-50s, like super nice guy. We started chatting before the hand, and we sat down, and he wore like some very expensive jewelry and really expensive watch, and we were playing like a 2K. And he was very, you could tell like he's out, like just from before, right? I didn't know who he was, and you could tell he's outgoing. He's probably more on the emotional side, more on the intuitive side, but also more on the pride and ego side. And like for me, that's, for example, in game, you will always see he hasn't studied like to weigh this on the other side. So his actions will reflect this personality in the hands he plays. So a guy tried to bluff him for 200 big blinds, and he called second pair and he won. And that's, I think that's a good representation where he had a bluff catcher. This type of personality will always choose to call if they feel, for example, they want to show the other party something. Like if the other guy is like a guy, maybe more where it's about a fight, the guy will never back off. But when it's, for example, someone, like younger or a female, like he would be more giving, and it's not so much about winning, So there's a very interesting dynamic in his characteristics that will show within the way he plays hands. And then on the other end, you will see someone who maybe has the same characteristics, but has studied for years, or like has played poker for a long time. They learn, like they will still have this characteristic, it will still be in them, but they learn to not let it run through all their actions. But you will still see it in everything they do. It will just maybe not convert to actions that much.
Okay. No, that was a great example with the Brazilian businessman. Can you give an example of the high level player and how it shows through all their actions? Who's contrasting with Stepan? Because I feel like there's a lot of calm, high stakes people who are really good at high stakes poker that are really calm and stoic, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So for example, let's take Mikita. Yeah. So I know him mediocre well, but like I think he's an exceptional player. And from when I start, because I saw him over the years, I think I played some of his first high roller, or like, when he started getting more into the high roller live scene, I played with him. So I saw him from the right beginning to now when he's, I think, an absolute end boss. And it's really interesting to see this development where he was full of doubt. Like he was very focused on numbers. He was very focused on, like I just play my game. Like this is, I studied this, and he gave away a lot of tells, and he was pretty uncomfortable as well. Like it wasn't his, just his surrounding. And to see that, where his personality, I think, is that he's a very, very genuine, very kind guy, actually. But he's also reserved, right? He's more, he wants to understand things, like it needs to be logically, it needs to be logical, and that's where he comes from. Is he learned poker through logical conclusions and a very, very theoretical approach. And then I could see how this approach is still the same. He's still logical in this approach, but he learned this other part of the game. So that was really, really cool to see how he's still the same, but he's much, much better in action.
Huh. It's interesting. It's interesting to point out that development. I didn't see that him do. I didn't watch his development myself, but it's always interesting to see the evolution of poker and players and people in general. Actually, by the way, do you know? Have you ever partied with him?
I think maybe once, but I believe he's into partying.
Yeah, kind of surprisingly so. A little secret about Nikita Fish 2000. What the fuck's his name? 13. 2013. All right. Is that he can rap to Eminem. So that's a bit of a surprise. And apparently he's pretty good with the ladies, which I don't know. He just seemed like a soft-spoken guy to me. I didn't expect either, really, for him to be a bit of a soothsayer and possibly a rapper. Who would have thought? What are some of the biggest challenges you've had becoming successful at poker?
I would say certainly almost only emotional. Like everything around the game was fun, I would say. So in terms of getting better, it was always fun and easy for me. In terms of what the challenges were, it was mostly emotional. So I had a weird position in the poker world where a lot of people had some anger or some reason to not like me, although they didn't really know me.
Go ahead. You said that you were talking about your emotional problems in poker, and people having issues with you, potentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would describe it. My biggest challenge was that, mostly emotional. That I felt like a lot of people had some type of tension with me without much interaction. So you could say, they maybe didn't like me or had some type of, I'm missing a good word, but it's mostly, it could be maybe sometimes envy. It could be like I felt it specifically when I had my really good year. It just felt like everyone else is losing type of thing, and I'm taking their money, and they, there's this anger towards me, like, oh, you're taking our money type of feeling.
Yeah.
And it's crazy because back then I couldn't really, how do you address this, or like how to talk about this, or how to, it was just tension, like a lot of like expectations from my end, but then also like it felt every interaction was a lot of tension. And it's crazy to see it now when all of them are rich and I'm not really in the scene anymore, and I come back to play a tournament. It's so relaxed, everyone is nice, and like there's none of that tension is there, or very little, and it's just a really relaxed atmosphere. And that to me was these were probably my biggest challenges, that I felt like I'm constantly emotionally challenged by lots of situations in the poker world.
You mean just socially, like outside the poker table, or do you mean because this would be outside? Well, I guess this would be on the table as well. I mean, this is an interest. I never even heard this take, but this makes a lot of sense.
It's because it's so weird to address, because how do I even call it? What is this? It's like, let's say with my close friends, I felt like I couldn't talk about problems because they think I'm beyond, like I run so good that I don't have the right to address something I'm not feeling well with. That was the first thing that was difficult, is I couldn't say, oh, I had a bad day, because then they're like, oh, but you just won like millions. That was the first thing. And the second thing was that in the poker environment, it felt like there was quite some aggression towards me of some form, not in an open way. And I think that's the thing that makes it difficult. Nobody ever was, openly mean to me.
Yeah. Envy is, what is it? There's like some kind of saying about it being like the silent, it might've been the silent assassin. I'm not sure, but it's like the silent, like way that people like kind of hold you back, or can hold you back in ways. It's kind of an ugly thing. It's up there on ugly things. There's lots of ugly things out there, but yeah, it seems like kind of a tricky thing to deal with, especially as someone who's like who's in the successful position where you didn't like necessarily do anything wrong. And it seems like I imagine that anytime you do something that can be interpreted as wrong, it like blows up, is my guess. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I guess it's
or at least
there's so many facets. There's so many facets to it as well. It was like, one part was I felt a lot of pressure in terms of performing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not, it's not that they did it, or like they did it, like I'm blaming someone. Like that's not really it. It's just, when I look back at my poker career, I just felt like in terms of the environment, I really like working with people. Like poker for me was always a way to mentally challenge myself, and I loved it because I had people I could bounce ideas back and forth with. Like this was the main reason I loved it. It's not, to sit there and grind. Like this was never really, like never, I never really enjoyed long grinds. I loved the studying part and the learning part, and I loved the playing part on a competitive level, but this was more like you do a test, like that was more this thing, rather than like I grind for 12 hours, 6 days a week. Like this, I never really did. So I love the learning and proving that I am good at what I learned, but I'm not, I don't want to engage in this, like big swinging contest so much. And that's why I didn't feel good about it. Like I didn't feel good about the position I put myself in, because I somehow ended up in this. I somehow ended up in like, oh, now I'm the number one, and like it's there's like an ego fight around who's better, and I just realized like, hey, I don't this is not good for me. I don't feel good about this.
Yeah, I actually had the same kind of issue with it myself, because like the point of poker, or a big part of the point of poker, is it's like you kind of have to test yourself against someone else. If you have to test I actually think a big aspect of it is testing your emotional intelligence, in the sense of testing your self-control and to some extent your discipline. A lot of emotional traits, emotional intelligence traits or values, this sort of thing, test your conviction. You have to be brave in a certain sense, but the issue with it is that it's someone has to lose. And actually, by the way, the theme of the podcast, the real theme of the podcast, is how do we all win the game of life? That's the ultimate theme, by the way. So you're kind of getting to that, which business is where it's, as people are actually lately learning in business. I think it was not always this way, but people are lately learning that the more value you give it to the world, ultimately the more money you make, or definitely the more most life utility you make. I don't know if the most money you make necessarily, that doesn't seem always true, but whatever. Anyway, winning the game of life, the big picture, it starts with being good enough to win at the poker table, I think is an important part, but starts with changing ourselves and ultimately, as you said, like lifting us up in a way, like working together kind of thing. But we'll get to the whole business stuff in a moment. Well, first, go ahead if you have some thoughts.
No, I think you summarized this one well. I am super interested in the game of life and making it uplifting. So,
all right. Well,
what are your thoughts on it?
My thoughts are we've got some good stuff coming up that you may be interested in. This is partly the podcast is part of it. You're actually part of it right now. Picture that, because the word's getting out, and maybe life can be a game we can all win. It's really complicated, actually. I'm trying to figure that part out. But part of it is exposure, which here we are, that building the podcast, spreading the word, making stuff happen. I understand you've got a fascination with Elon Musk. Do you want to talk about that? How does that affect how you live your life?
How do you get to that conclusion?
A little side research. Is that accurate?
I would say fascination. Yeah, I think he's interesting. I read his biography, and I follow some things he does, but I wouldn't say I'm a fanatic. But yeah, I find interesting what he does, and it's generally mostly also, there's this multiplier where how much traction he gets and how many people have an idea, like have this image of him, and I really strongly believe in this image of him. Like that I find also fascinating, how he built that, and this idea, because he's an image himself, like crazy image.
Yeah.
Even though he maybe doesn't have the most followers, I believe he's one of the strongest images in the world, and that's pretty impressive, like how he did that just by troll tweeting for a couple of years. Like,
that's actually really funny. All right, that is a bit of more of a tangent than I thought. I will say he's definitely got a hell of an image. One thing about, I wonder if poker can teach a lesson about image, because in life it's really hard to live up to your image, because a lot of people have these great images, but it takes really a lot of discipline and conscientiousness and awareness or whatever to be as big of a deal as your image, if that makes sense. Maybe it's impossible, I'm not even sure, but I'm really, I like to live up to a massive image seems super difficult. Maybe you live up to your image. You've got a good image, I'd say, Mr. I mean, it looks like I've seen a lot of like proactive kind of stuff as a, or at least stuff that I agree with. I think that is proactive as I've been looking into what you're doing. Go ahead.
So regarding image, I actually believe that honesty is the number one way to live up to your image, because there's nothing you need to live up to. There's no expectation you need to, if people believe X, you don't need to do X. It's authentic, and people are impressed and inspired by it if you just don't try to be X. I actually believe there's a strong correlation between that, is if you don't try to be what other people believe of you or think of you, is if you just do your thing and you tell them, like, this is what I'm going to do, and whatever they make of it, you just continuously tell them what you believe in, and what you have done and what you haven't done. And I feel that's much more attractive and inspiring than trying to create an image that you aren't or haven't done or whatever.
I almost totally agree with you. In theory, I agree with you 100%. The thing that I would, in practice, not necessarily agree with, I'm trying to think of the poker parallels of this a little bit, but in practice, I find it's very hard to, like, almost no one really 100% is what they say they are. And there's tons of people in the world that think that they're honest or think that they're good, but as soon as, like, and you know this probably, maybe you know this in poker, I don't know how much experience you have with, like, loaning people money, for example, but if people were as great as they aspire to be, they would always pay back, right? It's just really hard to have all the right characteristics in order as, like, practices to live up to what people would like to believe in, if that makes sense. I find that to be true all the time. And a lot of people's, like, idea of honesty and being good just is like what they're, how should I say? It falters very easily, if that makes sense, or it falters when it's tempted. Unfortunately, as like, life, you discover in life, especially if you're an idealist. What do you think?
Yeah, but I also think that, for example, I never was disappointed or sad that it happened. Like, for example, if I loaned someone money and he couldn't pay me back, it was never necessarily the fact that he couldn't pay me back. Like, I was or am well aware that that's, something that can happen. It's more the way that they lied about it, and they hid it, and, like, they lied again, and they said they will pay it back, and then they didn't pay it back, and then they ghosted you, and then they, like,
yeah.
I feel it is very much about the dishonesty spiral that comes with the fact itself. Like, if someone is honest about it and says, like, hey man, I fucked up, X, Y, Z happened, and they're like, that's the first thing they say, is they take responsibility, they're honest with what happened, and they say, hey, I can't pay you back right now. I will, update you on a regular basis and be transparent with, what type of income I have. Like, then what's going on. Then that's something you can plan with, and you still trust that person, like,
yeah.
I feel it's really more about the lying and deceiving and the fear and the, like, that part than it is about the actual thing that you aren't getting paid back.
Yeah, no, that I totally agree with. It's, like, really frustrating. Sometimes, ironically, like, when I've been in the shoes of the person who's owed money, I've actually found myself irrationally, like, angry at people who have tried to pay me back, but have been not the most honest or responsible people. Yeah, I've got someone in mind. God, what was that guy's name? It's pretty tall. He begins with a T. Tim. Yeah, maybe some guy like that comes to mind. Although we did really, it's funny because that guy paid a lot back, but sometimes the dishonesty or whatever really makes a lot of things seem really frustrating and worse and kind of infuriating. That I 100% agree. I wish that people at the very least got rid of that part and just, like, fessed up to all mistakes. 100% there. One thing I find about high stakes poker players that I personally pride myself in, and I think people get this wrong about a lot of high stakes poker players, but I think you're a fine example as well, is that a lot of them actually are really honorable and honest. That's what's really surprising to me. I don't even understand why that is, at least the high stakes successful ones. Maybe it's like because it's easier, but I don't know if it's because it's easier or because they always were, because I can't think of that many really that were dishonest and then that solved itself because then they had money, if you know what I mean. But it just feels as though maybe it's because they all had to rely on their competence more. I thought that when I was in my school, but what do you think?
I disagree with that, actually. I think,
really? Okay.
Yeah, I really think that it's mostly biased because people who are in good situations just don't need to do it. Like that is simply that. Like I think it really depends on which situation you put people in. I think the only quality that matters is how much you can keep your integrity when under pressure. Like, I think that's the only thing that matters, because keeping integrity when not under pressure is something that I think almost everyone can do. But like, you need to be a fuck up to, to be a, to steal from people when you're in a great spot. Like, I think that not many people do. But when you are under pressure, then taking from others or lying is like, that's, I think, very, very few people I know where I would say I trust them even when they are, in big trouble or under pressure. And I feel that's, not many.
Yeah.
And myself included. Like, if I got to be super honest there, is I would say when I was 19, like, I had a not rough, but like, we had never money, and like there were times where it was quite tight, and I definitely remember these feelings of like lying around money or like, stealing something out of a shop. Like there are definitely these moments where I could feel this like negative energy around. It's bad. Like, you feel like, with your back against the wall, and you're like, okay, like I don't know how to behave in this spot. And I feel it takes like years and years of practice. And even now I can feel like when I am under pressure that these thoughts come up, and it's like this exercise to calm them down and like, just know it's fine. Like I do my thing.
Well, of course it has to be the case that the pressure occurs when like your back's against the wall. I mean, it has to be the case, and that's when colors show. I'd like to imagine that the high stakes players have generally done the right thing when they have had their backs against the wall. At least most poker players have tried, in my experience. I mean, there's many examples I can think of. I actually think Bryn Kenny is one of the best examples. He had integrity in one particular situation that was of more than I think was reasonable, actually, but it worked out for him. I could be wrong, though. I could be wrong. Maybe it's just my confirmation bias. But another thing I'd like to demonstrate or talk about is that the people who are really, really successful, not exactly just in poker in my observations, but I haven't exactly taken a poll, is that they tend to be really good or charming people. Charming, in my experience, they tend to be really good people, at least from the outset. But of course, it's, in my experience, it's a bit polarized. And of course, things are never as it seems. They're at least really good at making a good impression, which is, in my opinion, a version of being good. It's sort of like, how can I say? It's like the equivalent of being aggressive in poker, right? So when you're aggressive in poker, it's better on average than being passive. But if you use it wrong, then it can be like a big hurdle, and it actually can really blow up in your face. And the same thing for if you're really charming, if that makes sense, because it's on the whole a good thing to be really charming. It's better, it makes people feel better, blah, blah, blah. But if you follow it up with shitty actions, it makes you look like a sociopath. But if you follow up with good actions, oh, now you're that great guy all along. You know what I mean? if that makes any kind of sense. Do you agree with my observations of successful people? I want to again add that sometimes they're the biggest pieces of shit ever, because that's important to know. I think they're polarized.
I see why you'd say that. I think there's a couple of things. That first of all, there's a huge bias towards meeting the ones that want to meet. Like a lot of the really successful ones that don't want to meet people, like obviously aren't very sociable.
Yeah.
So if you there's quite some people who who mostly have been really successful and prefer to not go out and meet a lot of people, and obviously you therefore have some bias to meet more sociable people because they're also looking to meet more people. So I feel that's the first thing, where if I go into the deep tech scene or the crypto scene, there's definitely some more people that just don't, like they also like interaction and they like collaboration, but they don't necessarily want to meet like hundreds of people. So that's one observation I made. And then the other one regarding the charm, I mean, I think a big part of it is like mobilizing resources, right? So getting people to work with you, or getting people to invest in you, or like a lot of what I've seen in the startup world is it's a huge part of it. It's not so much about how great you are at execution. It's also part of it, but it's also a lot about how well you are, like how good you are at mobilizing resources. And that's why more people are successful who have that quality, at least, whether themselves or in their team of founders. So that is a big part. And I would say then there's the third part that I see a lot is when you are successful, you also get more resources to develop yourself. Like this is what I've seen heavily is like there is this reinforcing spiral where when you do well, you have more money and more resources to do even better because you meet interesting people and you can travel and you can simplify things and you have great experiences, and then that leads to more development and more. And so generally I feel that people who are successful aren't interesting or inspiring or charming necessarily because they were like this with 16. It's more because they had 10 years of resources available to continue developing their personality, and then you end up more relaxed after 12 years of great personal development rather than 12 years of stress.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I personally think this all kind of boils down to how should I say? It all ultimately boils down to, do you use what you're given for better, or at least should I say, are the results that you get a matter of luck plus, how should I say, the resources that you're given? Because I mean, obviously people start in all sorts of places in life, and well, let's put it like this. It's the question I would ask is, as a poker example, there's this thing called an edge, and there's all these like swings up and down or whatever, but all you can do is focus on your edge, and ultimately it leads to going higher and higher places. And I personally think there is an edge in life. And yes, of course, the more success you have, the more potential for edge you have. And I would even personally, at least, I would like to do a lot more research on this because it's a very hard thing to prove. I would argue that the more and more edge the whole world has, the more parabolic the experience of the world can be, if that makes sense. The whole parabolic, I mean, you can see in technology, the progress of technology is going parabolic. So would you say there's a significant edge in life, or you think it's all, or do you think really there's just a shit ton of variance and the edge is really diminished, and it's kind of diminishing these days? Or what do you think?
I'm not sure I can vibe with the edge comparison to life, because I feel edge is like so much about a win rate, and in like, you know, within a predefined environment, because you need to set what you're winning at.
Yeah.
And to define if you're winning or not, there needs to be some type of definition of what is a win and what is a loss. And I feel that is a misconstruction around like life being defined or definable. I don't think it is. I think it's beyond our comprehension, so complex, because there's no boundary where you can draw a line and say, okay, there's where the connection ends. I think everything is connected basically, and it's either you understand it all or you don't understand it enough basically. And I don't think understanding it all is really feasible or even understandable.
Oh, for sure. No.
For me, it's more when I look at what I understand what you meant with edge, when I look at that or try to think about that, or, you know, let's say good and bad for an even simpler simplification of, you know, doing something good for the world, then what I have to think of all the time is I believe we as humans always try to optimize for us. Like I believe even when we do something for someone else, then it's because our consciousness is at a point where we believe that doing something for that person is good for us.
Yeah.
And I really truly believe that the only progress that is helpful for us is to understand more and more connections of things. So that basically I believe there is a connection between your well-being and my well-being. And I believe that it is generally better for me if everyone else is doing well. And that, I think, leads to a really, really nice dynamic where if we all care about the well-being of everyone else, then we automatically help ourselves. Like, I think we see it very much in society, is when in countries or cities where people are doing much better, like immediately everything else is like rising up as well, for lots of unseen reasons. And I guess that's kind of my life philosophy, that to try to understand more connections and try to really understand how you feel, what's going on in your life, like in different people's lives across the globe, and trying to question, you know, different viewpoints. Like I feel that automatically leads to better behavior, you know, or me automatically doing more things that take more people into consideration. Like that's, I guess, my life philosophy.
Thanks for listening to part 1 of this conversation. Don't miss part 2 tomorrow. Of course, hit subscribe and follow Dan on Instagram at @TheDanCates.